Okay. Thank you for your patience. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the special event being hosted by the Center for Business Champions at Childhood Education International. We're really delighted to have you all here with us in person, and we're also joined by colleagues online. Quite a number of persons online joining from different countries, and here you are in front of us. So we're very excited to be able to offer this hybrid opportunity for us all to come together to discuss this really important topic of building business partnerships to strengthen the future through early childhood development. My name is Samantha Prasad, and I am with Childhood Education International, and I will be taking you through some housekeeping notes. I'll share the agenda with you and we'll start the program. So for the housekeeping notes, a few things to keep in mind. The first is that this event is being recorded with your consent, and we will share that recording with you after the event. And since we are working to a hybrid model here, I will say to our virtual attendees that if you are experiencing any technical issues, any problems in accessing the feed, please use the Zoom key, and an event administrator is going to help you with that. There is going to be a question and answer session for both audiences at the end of the panel discussion that we will have. And so for virtual attendees, those of you who are online, at any point, feel free to use the Q&A feature to submit your question to us, and we will get to that. For those of you who are in person, raise your hand and we'll have a microphone and you can ask your question directly. The small note for those of us online, if you could refrain from using the raise hand function on your end, that would be great. And finally, just to note that we will do our best to answer all of the questions. We have reserved time in 2 different slots to have your questions and have participation. If first, for some reason we're not able to get to your question in this time constraint, we will absolutely follow up with you. So be sure to ask all of your questions and don't hold them back. So those are some housekeeping notes for us. And then moving on to the agenda that we have for today, we will have some opening remarks, and then we will move into the expert panel discussion. We have panelists here with us in person, and we have some joining online. That will be followed by a commentary from Godwin Otieno, a question and answer session, a wonderful presentation from Sarah Watson on the practical strategies that we can use in this work. And then we'll have another opportunity to discuss and close. So to get started with the welcoming remarks, I would like to introduce you to Diane Whitehead, who is the President and CEO of Childhood Education International. She's a global education leader whose work has had a profound impact on children and families worldwide. And our organization, Childhood Education International, has been around for more than 130 years. And under Diane's leadership, she has really worked to increase our global impact and engagement and design all kinds of innovative programs for reaching children and families. And this Center for Business Champions is one such initiative that you will learn a lot about here today. And I would like to say that, her commitment to equity and social justice and transformation through education has been inspiring to me personally and to all of us at CE International. So won't you join me in welcoming Diane to the podium? Thank you.
Thank you so much. It is absolutely so exciting for me to be here today with all of you. Welcome, a hearty welcome from CE International, the Center for Business Champions. Really exciting to have us here. And we're going to be talking about strengthening the future of child development through business partnerships. Many of you are with us virtually. And so we welcome all of you in our virtual community also. Lots of you have joined with us in person, so we're really happy to have you here as well. And we've got attendees, as Amlata was saying, from all over the world, I think 50 countries, 5 continents. So we're truly, truly happy to be sharing this message out across the globe. It is such an important message that we have to share with you today. We're also pleased to have representatives from such diverse organizations. We have some private sector business representatives here with us. We have government agency representatives, we have NGO representatives, and representatives from international organizations and academic institutions. So thank you. We're really happy to invite you into this space with us. And we acknowledge, especially to those of you who are out there across the world listening to us, we acknowledge that it's you who are leading and guiding transformation in your nations and your communities. We're here to support that, to hold your hand as you look to new, innovative ways of strengthening partnerships, and in this case, particularly with the business sector. Many of you know CE International, so I won't tell you much about it. You're welcome to go and look at our website, please, or contact us. That we work on some of the most pressing issues that are happening in today's world. Yes, we're about education, but we're also about protection, well-being, really looking at holistic learning of children as well. So that is all important to us. And we know that these pressing issues are just growing. And it's sad to see that happening with crisis events, climate change, war, conflict, food insecurity, so many things that we have to pay attention to today. And CE International, really our core mission is to find innovative solutions to education challenges and to secure those bright futures by looking again at what is surrounding the child. What's the environment and the enabling environment that is going to help that child to succeed? And when we use the term business, keep in mind that we are looking at not necessarily at the sort of education industry, the private sector industry. Those are businesses that are out there building schools, operating schools, but we're really looking at businesses that haven't traditionally been involved in education before and supporting children's development. So that is sort of the space that the Center for Business Champions lives in. And as many of you know, in the next couple of weeks, New York is going to be crowded, very crowded. The United Nations General Assembly will be happening here. We'll have representatives from all over the world who are in New York. They're holding their annual meetings, and they're really looking at those critical social and economic issues that are affecting our planet. So it's an important time. I love all the United Nations General Assembly meetings, but I have to say, I think this year is going to be one for the record, so to speak. In conjunction with the United Nations General Assembly, which for short I will call UNGA, they are holding a summit for the future. The Summit for the Future is bringing together leaders from around the world who can have an impact, who can change the way that people are living in community, connecting in community. This is an exciting moment, and there has been a build up to the Summit of the Future over the last couple of years. So we're really, really excited. We link into that because there is a pact for the future that has been developed. It's in a draft form right now, a document in draft form. Please take a look at the draft pact for the future. If you haven't seen it yet, you can go on the Summit of the Future website and take a look at that. And this will be finalized during the summit. So that's really exciting. So how does this event we're holding today connect with the Summit of the Future? Well, it's really connected in some really important ways. One being partnerships and collaboration. Excuse me. We know that SDG 17 really speaks to partnerships as well, Sustainable Development Goal 17. That is really coming forward in the Summit of the Future. We'll be talking about partnerships and collaboration, innovative solution to pressing world challenges, the future of childhood itself, and how we're all going to finance and support progress forward for all the people of the world, but particularly our children, right? Those who are small, need our support, need our love, need our care, so that they can grow up in a world that they can be healthy and happy in. We know that the private sector, the business sector, plays a critical role in addressing challenges and ensuring that future generations can reach their full potential and thrive. We use that word a lot, thrive, but I want us to start thinking about that more mindfully. What does it mean when we use the word thrive? That's really important for us to take into consideration. So at the Center for Business Champions, which I'm also going to call the CBC for short, so if anybody wants to use CBC, that's what we're talking about. We foster those collaborations between two sectors that are seemingly different, but they can be really powerful allies in supporting young children and youth around the world. These groups do share common goals, and they operate in different arenas. But as you'll hear next from the director of the CBC, we're really dedicated to building those partnerships and to helping these two seemingly quite different arenas to be able to talk to each other and to come up again with innovative solutions on how we can build a better world for all. We know business is critical. And I also want to acknowledge that there are a lot of businesses that are doing so much around the world. So much good work is already happening. So we're not here to say it's not happening. We're just here to say, let's grow it. Let's expand it. Let's nurture what's happening, right? So again, very exciting moment for us. So investment in children must start early. We need those actions to be local. We need those actions to be sustainable. And we need to effectively support economic and social development that we're all striving for, especially focused on those youngest ones amongst us. So with that, I would like to go ahead and introduce Dr. Sarah Watson. Dr. Sarah Watson, we're so proud to be collaborating with her. I keep using the word exciting, but it is an exciting moment for us. I just have to keep repeating that. So you're going to hear me say it several times. Dr. Sarah Watson is director of our Center for Business Champions. And Sarah founded and was the national and then global director of Ready Nation and Ready Nation International. And they were designing the fundraising for and leading the organization for over 14 years. Her work included encouraging nearly 1,000 business executives to join campaigns to support early childhood investment and guiding them on how to take action. How can businesses be involved in being a voice for our children? So that is what Sarah's expertise is in. She's worked with local partners in Australia, Romania, and Uganda, and Brazil, and many other nations to create their own networks for business champions for early childhood. And she's presented at numerous conferences and international conferences worldwide for business champions for early childhood. And then Sarah conceptualized and led the global business summits that were actually held here in New York. So was really proud again of the work that she has done over the years, really looking at bringing business executives together, right? So very exciting for her. And I have known Sarah personally for many years, so I just wanted to add that. She's a national expert who we've all looked to in our careers to guide us on child development, and very special that she is here with us now at the Center for Business Champions. So thank you so much. I think my sign fell off, but here we go. Okay, thank you. Welcome everyone in the room and with us virtually.
Great, thank you, Diane. I had to cross excited off my script. So I wouldn't repeat too much, but we are so pleased at this partnership to help people in almost any country figure out how their business community can help make their children's lives better in whatever way works in that country. We were especially impressed at what Diane said. Not only are there people from more than 50 countries, but many of these countries, including Ukraine and other countries, are battling war and turmoil and violence, and they are still here because they care about the future of their children, and they see this as one path forward. So we're really pleased that people who have many things to worry about are thinking about the future of their children. So I want to mention just a little bit more about the Center for Business Champions, and there's some, for people who like paper, there's some nice brochures over on the table that you can take with you. We're very excited to figure out how we can partner with you. We have 3 basic bodies of work. One is a training institute that will be online in early 2025. That is for people from any country that want to learn the basics of engaging the business community. Then we also offer intensive training for a group of people from a particular country, or a city can also work, that want to create their own network of business champions. So kind of walking through that process. We were thrilled to do that with Brazil, as you will hear in just a few minutes. And then the third body of work is working with business people to include children, early childhood development, but also other children's issues in their CSR or ESG portfolio, so that we can really get the whole power of the business community behind supporting children. So with that, I'm going to move to introducing our panel, and I believe we have our three panel members online. So I will do a quick introduction, and then we will have a conversation with them and give you chances to ask them questions. And then I'll talk a little bit about just some practical advice about engaging business, and you'll get a little snippet of what the whole training that we can offer, because we wanted this conversation to not just be at this high level, but to give you some very practical advice on engaging your business community. I'll start with Carmen Lica, who's the director of Step by Step Center for Education and Professional Development in Romania. And Carmen, in 2019, she was decorated as a knight by the president of Romania as a sign of appreciation for the important work she's done in education reform. So did that mean I should call you Sir Carmen? Okay. Carmen, yeah, Carmen's good. And another example kind of for bridging these two worlds, she recently joined the first Romanian non-bank financial institution with Romanian capital dedicated to investing in the social economy sector. And in 2016, I was very pleased to work with Carmen in creating a business network in Romania, which she will tell you a little bit more about. The next person I'll introduce is Victor Grasa, who is the superintendent of Fundação of Brink, the leading nonprofit organization that advocates for and promotes the rights and well-being of children and adolescents in Brazil. So we were very pleased to work with him on training his staff on building the Champions for Children network that they are creating. I'll go to Aaron Merchant, who is the Senior Director of Policy and Programs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, where he works on the early childhood portfolio. The U.S. Chamber is the organization of large businesses in the U.S. that has taken a real leadership role on early childhood. And before joining the Chamber, Aaron worked at the National Association for the Education of Young Children in the U.S. And Jim Sperlino, my dear friend Jim Sperlino, is the kind of person that you want to engage as a business leader. He is the founder of Sperlino Materials, a U.S. recognized supplier of construction materials. He's been on the board of many early childhood and children's organizations in the U.S. He is a longtime member of Ready Nation, where he talked to members of Congress about the importance of investing in children. And he's also been a candidate for U.S. Congress and has written 2 books, one on business bullseye, and the other is Losing Our Elections, What I Learned Running for Congress. So he's really been in the thick of politics. And then lastly, we'll have a commentary. We'll hear from Godwin Otieno, who is currently the Director of Strategy and Partnerships at Goldstone Consulting, a regional multi-sector firm that aims to reduce poverty through enterprise development. Godwin has previously worked with Private Sector Foundation Uganda, where we collaborated on creating Early Steps Uganda, and he's also worked with UNICEF. So he has a wonderful background in engaging the business community to support early childhood. So with that, let's go to the panel discussion. We have our panel members on screen. Great, great. So glad to see all of you. Thank you very much for joining us. Godwin, it's been a while. Really glad to see your face in person. Thank you. So I'm going to ask each of them to respond briefly to why, from their perspective, it's important to engage the business community and what they did. And I think all of you probably think this is a good idea or you wouldn't be here. So, but it's important to hear from very different positions what they're hoping to get out of it, and specifically what they've done. And we'll start with Carmen.
Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure and an honor in the same time to be here with you in person and with people online and with my panel colleagues. That's a challenging question. We started in 2016 when I met Sarah in a congress in Paris. And talking, we realized that we didn't think of involving business people in supporting our cause. Step-by-Step Center for Education and Professional Development in Romania started its activity in 1994. So it's 30 years. There were a lot of years in 2016. And we had this wow moment. Yes, business community, it's a very important partner that we should consider and we should start talking to. And the context was so generous with us that we can started a partnership with Ready Nation, and Sarah guided our work and our first steps. And it's a sign I want to share with you. I shared it with Sarah in the morning. In New York, we are hosted by my very dear friend, Dina Heller, which we started with Step by Step in 1994. She was working with New York University then, and I asked her to give me a small notebook, and she said, I have one. And this is the first notebook we made for our first business conference in Bucharest in 2016. And so I thought it's a sign. We started engaging business people one by one. We went into very long conversations. Sometimes we felt desperate that it seemed that nobody was listening to us and that our message about the importance of early childhood and about the importance of the first years for every child was not getting to the business people. But after several meetings, we just thought the blink in the eye of one business person who paid attention, and he was our first business champion. We learned about business champions from Sarah. And so we had him engage the other people. We had some people who asked many questions. We had people who just jumped and supported us from the very beginning. And basically they became our ambassadors because they were talking the business language to their peers, the language which we didn't talk that time. We organized between 2016 and 2020 an annual business conference where we had the business community coming together with non-governmental organizations working in the field of education, especially, and also health and social protection. The Ministry of Education and UNICEF was also one of our partners, together with some big companies that supported our efforts at that time. Some of the big businesses remained our partners and continue to support our programs and engagement in early childhood. And I think I will stop for now.
Okay, great. You'll have a second chance to add any other questions. Aaron, why is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce so involved in early childhood?
Well, so thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you everyone who's in the room and online. I work with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, which is the foundation branch of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which represents millions of businesses around the world, the majority of which are small businesses. And we really view childcare in a number of ways. The first is that it's a two-generation workforce issue. It's essential for the workforce of today. Working parents knowing that they have someplace safe and secure and quality where their children can thrive while they go and thrive themselves in the workforce. And it's also essential for the workforce of tomorrow, as we all know that foundational skills and core competencies are created in those first 5 years. And so in addition to being a workforce issue, it is also something that we're very invested in to ensure that the United States has a competitive economy for generations to come. We really view childcare as a national issue that is going to require local solutions. And the ways in which we connect with our core constituency, which are businesses, is to make sure that they have the resources, the connections, and the technical assistance that they require so that they can speak to this issue from a place of knowledge, but also understand that while there is a role for the business community to play, it is not necessarily the business community's sole responsibility to solve it. And so that means getting themselves up to speed on the way that childcare providers keep the lights on, which is oftentimes a fraught process in and of itself, understanding resource and referral agencies, understanding the different types of childcare. And so at the Chamber Foundation, we try to speak to as many businesses, as many chambers of commerce, state and local as possible to ensure that they both have an understanding of childcare as a sector in and of itself, and as small businesses that are predominantly owned by women. So childcare providers are in fact part of the business community, but then also the ripple effects that a lack of childcare can have on those economies. We have a series of reports that we refer to as the untapped potential reports, and we go state by state because again, every state's a little bit different. And that has shown that because of childcare breakdowns that cause absenteeism by working parents, increased turnover, folks dropping out of the workforce entirely, what we see are economic potentials left on the table. In some cases, this is hundreds of millions of dollars. In many states, at the state level alone, it's oftentimes billions of dollars per year that are lost due to childcare breakdowns. And those breakdowns are due to a lack of sufficient funding. We have, and by we I mean the Chamber and the Chamber Foundation, we have ourselves fallen into the trap of referring to it as sort of a glass half empty sort of outlook, where we're losing money, we're leaving money on the table, we don't have enough childcare. And what we're really trying to do, now that we've had this generational shift in the way that business leaders view childcare since 2020, we're trying to look at it as a little bit more of an opportunity, more of a glass half full. Instead of we're losing billions of dollars, look what we stand to gain by investing in childcare. Look at the millions of dollars that we could add to our economy if we focus our attention and prioritize investments in childcare. And so at the Chamber of Commerce, we're not here to tell folks what type of childcare works best for them. We're not here to tell employers what type of supports they should offer, but we want to make sure that they have as much information as possible so that they can make decisions at those local levels to ensure that childcare providers, that the kids, that working parents and employers have the resources and the access that they need to quality childcare in order for their communities to grow and for their economies to thrive. And I'm excited to continue this conversation. Thanks again, Sarah.
Thank you, Aaron. We're gonna go to Victor.
Morning, everyone. Thank you to invite me to be here, Diane and Sarah. Thank you very much. Just to give you an overview of us, we work in Brazil. ABRINC is the Toy Manufacturer Association. So
I just want to make sure, can people hear him? You might move that microphone closer. Yeah, just move it.
Is it you talk?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I was talking about when we started. So ABRINC, the Toy Manufacturer Association, they decide to give back to the society, start a foundation, and for sure we start with entrepreneurs. So we have some members in the board who know the importance of this. So we started 34 years ago working against child labor. In Brazil, there are more than 9 million children working. And we talk about education, health, and protection. We run 16 programs and projects. We don't receive money from the government. We have 50,000 individual donors and 5,000 companies giving us money, small donations every month. So we have this understanding from the board, which is important that the companies and the leaders to be involved. However, when 34 years ago, we changed a lot our members. So that's when we start to talk to Sarah years ago. After the pandemic crisis, we reconnected. We started this idea to have, which we call in Portuguese, campeões pela infância. And we did this training to have all the new employees understand the importance of this and start all over Brazil a new culture. So we have 50% of the families headed by women. We need daycare centers. We have like 1 million positions in IT. So without people to fill these positions, so we have a problem with our education. So we're going to reconnect to improve those leaders. And yes, they pay lots of taxes, but they need to improve their activities, ESG activities, for example. So it's that why we are here. We are going to launch our project in November in Brazil.
Great, thank you, thank you. And Jim, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So why is this important from a business perspective to support early childhood, and tell us a little bit about what you've done?
Sure. I tell briefly how I kind of came into my interest and work in early childhood. Is I actually was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal one day, and on the front page of it, it had a piece about a home visitation program in my home state here in Ohio. And it talked about the good work that it did, but it also talked about how that particular nonprofit was run with a lot of business principles that were born from their support from Procter & Gamble, obviously a large international company. And it really kind of piqued my interest, mostly starting around some of the economic research that was done and proof of the return on investment in early childhood. And from that interest in that aspect of it, I really got into more of the science, which is typically the way I think a lot of businessmen go, is they want to dig a little deeper and understand a little more foundationally why an issue might be important. And particularly the brain development science really intrigued me. And so that combination is what drew myself into interest in early childhood, and then further work. And Sarah, you and I met probably longer ago than either one of us remember. But I really have enjoyed all of my time at Ready Nation, which is the U.S. Business Champion organization that Sarah founded, and has been so effective for so many years, using businessmen as unexpected messengers. And I kind of get a kick out of Sarah. You used my headshot with a hard hat on, which maybe I do wear a hard hat once in a while, but not every day at work and not in my office. But I think there's a real value in finding these business champions and having them side by side with the early childhood community in pressing these issues, particularly in our community, with our elected officials, with the folks that can help us make progress on so many of these things. And I want to comment on two other things real quick. One is I love the first story about it was tough to find a business champion, and then you saw the glint in one guy's eye, and there is your first champion. And that's the way that it starts. It is finding those early adopters, not the late adopters, not even the fence sitters. You want to find those early adopters and then build on that. And so many times, businessmen will listen because we're not always real bright or have a lot of time, but we'll listen to only our peers to get new ideas, or listen to them too often rather than listen to maybe the experts. And so that is really a great jumping off point to building these communities. And the other thing I wanted to comment on, Aaron talked a lot about the U.S. Chamber's involvement in childcare, and it's so interesting how childcare has suddenly become an issue that so many businesses have come around to support, really just since the pandemic, and it's been important way longer than that. And so often business champions become champions because it affects their business rather than it's just the right thing to do. And I've spent a lot of time talking to people about why childcare is not babysitting. It is early learning. It is all about early learning. It's not about dropping your kid off and having somebody watch them at the daycare center. And it's interesting, though, the business community gets involved because it actually has an economic impact on their businesses first. But those same business leaders also come to realize how important it is, the impact, not just immediate, but long-term, and all of the things that go into helping these children thrive, like was said at the top of this program. And that's what's so important to folks as they start to learn more about this issue.
Jim, can you tell the story about how you drew the analogy between your business and early childhood?
Sure. So I am in the construction business. A lot of what we do is concrete. So it sounds kind of boring, but it's everything you see in your world that you kind of take for granted. It's all the buildings, all the roads, all the bridges. You would never get to work without my product. So I get to brag about that. But I was in a group with a bunch of businessmen, and we were in, I don't know, the tallest building in a city here in Ohio, not a very tall building, but a 30-story building. We're at the top having lunch, and I'm talking to them about the importance of early childhood. And I said, this is a great building. It's really sturdy. We're on the 30th floor. None of us are worried about the building falling, and it's built well and it doesn't sway. And I said, that's great. And I said, that concrete on this floor that we're standing on is really important. I said, but you know what the most important concrete in this whole building was? This big 30-story building literally has millions of pounds of concrete that make it up. I said, the most important concrete that exists in this building is the first concrete that was poured. It's the foundation. It's below the street level. You can't even see it, but it's what everything rests on. It's what everything was built on, was that first concrete we poured, the foundation. And that's what early childhood is about. And if we don't get the foundation right, you can build the best building on top of it that you can imagine. But if you don't get the foundation right, you're going to have failures, you're going to have problems, you're going to have issues. And hopefully that was an example that a few people, made them kind of have the light turn on and think more about what the importance of early childhood investments are.
Isn't that great story? He came up with that all by himself. Oh, right. I did not script that. I just thought that's such a great example of making it real for your business audience. Okay, now I'm going to ask each of them a slightly different question. And so I'm going to go back to Jim. We're going to do it in reverse order. So you grew up very much in the business professional culture, rose to the top of your company, and you work a lot with people in the social sector, the children's sector. Can you talk a little bit about the differences in the professional culture and what each of them needs to know about the other to work well together?
Sure. It's an interesting question because I don't think it's really unique to any kind of business relationship or personal relationship even, is that we all come from different backgrounds. And for the most part, when we all go to our day job, there are tens or hundreds of things that bombard us that we kind of have to pay attention to and work on. But we also have some time to spend thinking about things outside of our immediate life concerns at work. And I think that's the connection, that understanding that's so important, is that where we can find that time to actually understand where the other person's coming from on an issue and why it's important. And I love the story about finding that first businessman, to kind of pick up on the importance of early childhood investments, for instance. And it's because he probably, his manufacturing plant wasn't broken, or he didn't have a HR issue, or he didn't have a legal issue or something. He had a minute to think about long term and what else is important. And I think there's a lot about understanding that other person's position and where they're coming from. And so important to me to try and to be, I'm going to use a word that might sound a little strange in early childhood, but I think it's important to be opportunistic. It's to find what is that reason that another person might be interested, or how they might start to work with you. And rather than spend a lot of time, pursuing your own agenda exactly the way you had it laid out in the morning when you went to work, is finding that common ground and that reason to work together. And what I love about working with folks like you, Sarah, is I love seeking out and finding the real experts, the real champions on the early childhood side to work with, because that's what I enjoy. And I expect that it works both ways. There's always a reason to enjoy working with people that are smart and experienced and excel in their field.
Great, Victor, going to you, and we want to know, what are your plans for the Business Champions group, the Champions for Children group? And can you talk a little bit about how we worked with you on building that?
We are in the end of the training. We'll be through, you provide us lots of information on how to do it. And now we have a team of 10 employees who knows where we're going now, how to approach the leaders, how Jim said about the ROI. I think it's very important to the leaders to understand they're going to invest, but long term, they're going to have the ROI. And we already have some people interested, but we are going to launch in November. And in the first year, the idea is to have like 10 leaders working with us. We're going to train them or to explain them how is the situation of children in Brazil. and gonna give them some options, like if they prefer to go more with education or health. It's sad, but in Brazil, 100 children between 0 and 5 years die every day in Brazil. It's a shame. We are in the top 10 economies in the world, and we still have this issue. And share with them means that they're going to work in different projects with us, but besides that, advocacy, because we still need to approve some laws and to implement public policy there as a law, but not implemented on the field. So we have this people so excited to use the word in our team, and we are going to have a good experience after the training.
And I think you said you have a business lead, you had your first champion who got that same gleam in their eye when you were talking
Yes,
to them about it.
the guy is from Grand Thornton. He's going to join us at the event next Thursday, and he's helping us to find research. So sustainability is still a problem for us. But when we talk to them, it's not about our foundation's sustainability, it's about the cause. So when we said about the whole thing, he said, "Oh no, I want to be one of them."
That's great. That's really great. Okay, Aaron, almost every country has multiple chambers of commerce, and I'm wondering if you could give any advice specifically about how to get your local chamber of commerce to care about this issue, and if there's any other advice you want to give, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely. I think there's a few different ways. I would say the first piece of advice that I would have is that I touched on this in the first round, but folks who provide childcare as a profession are businesses. And so sort of gently reminding chambers of commerce in a county, in a country, that is the case, I think is always helpful. I also think that it's good to remember that chambers of commerce specifically are membership organizations. So there are businesses of all sizes who sort of feed into the Chamber of Commerce. And so finding who are your local or national Chamber of Commerce's biggest members, and whether it's biggest in terms of the number of employees that they employ, whether it's a certain sector that has a lot of sway. And so starting those conversations as a childcare advocate or childcare provider with individual employers who belong to chambers of commerce, or even if they don't, to be honest, because chambers of commerce are really interested in sort of like the larger economic picture. And so it's kind of creating that momentum. At the U.S. Chamber Foundation, we created an initiative that we call the Early Childhood and Business Advisory Council. We need to come up with a snappier name. But what we did was facilitate the connection between state and local early childhood experts and providers with state and local chambers of commerce, and then also looped in state administrators who work on childcare. And the goal was to almost literally put them in a room and provide, background, technical assistance, resources, and have them have a dialogue and look at, okay, here are the business community's top priorities, here are the childcare sector's top priorities, and there was a lot of overlap between those two. Maybe the number one priority wasn't the same for each, but if you look at their top 5 priorities, a lot of times they had some common ground. And so from there they went with talking to policymakers, talking to other businesses, and in a unified voice saying, here are the things that we think need to get done to support providers, to support kids, to support businesses. The third thing, and this sounds, Sarah, like I'm kind of like being cute, but I mean it genuinely because it's worked for me many times. So I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And so if anybody else has kids, I'm immediately empathetic to, the child care of it all, whether it's pick up and drop off, whether it's, the colds that they bring home. And so when you are talking to a business leader, a chamber of commerce, if you can figure out who at that Chamber of Commerce has recently had a kid, there is no greater advocate for childcare than someone who suddenly finds themselves either in need of childcare or experiencing the childcare conundrum for themselves. I will also say, and this is not to water down, the impact, the effect of chambers of commerce, But sometimes it's not the chamber itself that is maybe the leading voice. And so if it's an economic development agency, if it's, and so, reach out to chambers, but if you can pinpoint who holds the major levers in terms of economic progress, I would say that is going to be your best bet. And then finding that common ground, finding that unified voice to move forward collectively.
Great. And in the training, one of the things we talk about is finding the industries and the business groups that are most likely to be receptive to this message. So thank you, Erin. And I'm going to turn to Carmen, and one of her early champions was the head of the American Romanian Chamber of Commerce. But Carmen, you were a leader in the social sector, in the children's sector. What have you learned in working with the business community?
Oh, I learned a lot together with my team in the Step by Step Center and our colleagues in Ready Nation, Romania. I think what probably the most important lessons were that we needed a plan, and we designed the plan. The series of conferences were part of the plan. We got in touch and we started conversations with Romanian business leaders, which is the biggest business community in Romania, where all the important business leaders get together. We also got in touch with the Romanian American Chamber of Commerce in Bucharest, and we started a conversation with their education committee about early childhood, the importance of early childhood, and the importance of having early childhood on their agenda as the Romanian American Chamber of Commerce. We learned to speak their language. We learned to use the context, as Aaron said. We learned to find out if they have children, or if they have grandchildren, or if they have friends with young children and they are concerned about young children. We also learned to look at the main challenges and at the context in our country. We had challenges regarding the workforce. We had challenges regarding the costs of early school leaving. We had challenges regarding the PISA results. And I must confess that I met Jim in 2018 at the Ready Nation Summit, and I loved his story about the foundation of the house. And it's the story that made our professional early childhood language understandable to the business community.
Wow, Jim, did you know that? You had an impact in Romania.
Yes, yes. And this is a story that our business champions tell to their peers, and it's something that it's easy to understand, and then it's easy to get them into the conversation about the neuroscience and all the science that prove the importance of early childhood and the importance of the strong foundation and the strong start. So we looked at the context, and we look at their priorities at the business community. They were concerned when we started about the PISA results and how these results and early school leaving, these two things combined, affect the workforce that they were desperately needing at that point. And we also learned that we should look at things that can be done within a political 4 years strain with a long-term impact. We learn from the business community that we should advocate for the cause, but we should plan to accomplish what can be accomplished in a 4 years time with our political leaders, and plan in a way that it has a long-term impact and it can bring further steps. Although it might sound strange, COVID was a huge opportunity with the national recovery and resilience plans, because everybody learned how difficult it was for young children to be at home with parents working, and how important the early childhood services are, and the quality of the early childhood services. So we managed to have in the Romanian national recovery and resilience plans to develop the early childhood infrastructure, but what we learned together with the business community. And no matter how much money we have, and no matter how strong the buildings are when we build them, it is important to have high qualified professionals to work and to take care with our children and provide them early learning opportunities. This is in a nutshell what we learned.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carmen. I'm so excited to get to talk to Godwin Otieno from Kampala, Uganda. And Godwin and I worked together when he was at Private Sector Foundation Uganda, which is essentially the national business organization, to launch an early childhood initiative. And honestly, it kind of ran into a wall with COVID and some foundation funding that went away. But while it was up and functioning, it really had some wonderful policy accomplishments, and Godwin and I are hoping to revive that work post-COVID. So Godwin, can you tell us about your experiences working with Private Sector Foundation Uganda in creating Early Steps Uganda? What were some of the accomplishments, and could you reflect on what you heard from the other panelists? Does that sound like your experience in Uganda?
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Diane, and all the panelists for your insightful submissions. I also want to thank all the participants, the audience that is out there that is listening to us. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm speaking from Uganda, a tiny country here in East Africa, but very beautiful, commonly referred to as the Pearl of Africa. It's a go-to destination for any holiday that one would need, really. Before I go into answering the question on how we started the early steps, I would want to just give perspective on what the early steps program was in a nutshell. Essentially, it was an initiative of the Private Sector Foundation, just as Sarah has mentioned, that was aimed at mobilizing business leaders to invest, to participate, and take action on early childhood development. And just as Sarah has mentioned, the Private Sector Foundation was and is still the apex body for the private sector in Uganda. So it's a big association that encompasses all the business entities, that are resident here in Uganda. At that time, when the idea to start the Early Steps program started, the ECD sector was essentially neglected, largely neglected in Uganda. And at that point, between 2014, 2015, several reports had come out from UNICEF, from USAID, on the state of children in Uganda. And the reports were glaring on issues related to, education. Children were lagging behind in education, lagging behind in healthcare, in nutrition, issues of child protection, child labor, exploitation were really high. And there was consensus at that point in time that there was need to take action, and there was need to have stakeholders, get involved in addressing these challenges. But the usual suspects were involved, the civil society, the development partners, and the government. Coincidentally, at that time, we were inspired by what was happening in the United States with the Ready Nation, the movement to mobilize business leaders to appreciate the ECD sector. And we saw the momentum it had generated. We read about, the works that were happening and the influence they had on policy. And we got convicted to start the Early Steps program. So with support from Ready Nation, we started on the initiative to mobilize business leaders in Uganda. And that is how the journey began. How we did it is also being reflected upon by some of the speakers who mentioned about the language. We started by ensuring that we have the appropriate language for the business community. Because recall, ECD is a sector that is far away from them. And it is an area they think is, for government, for civil society, and for other players. it doesn't really resonate with them. So working with Ready Nation, we coined appropriate messaging on how the private sector would get involved, especially on the economic, the moral imperative for them to invest in ECD, the cost of inaction. We made reference to a couple of reports and statistics on the cost of inaction. We also made reference to the situation that was happening in Uganda at that time regarding the issues of education, healthcare, and where the private sector would be plugged in to ensure that they make a contribution. Of course, we also anchored that onto the benefits that come with investing in children, workforce productivity, issues to do with lifelong success, national competitiveness, and so on and so forth. So once we got our messaging right, and it was clear that this was a message that would resonate with the private sector, we rolled out, to engage them in this conversation. And we had this engagement at two levels. The first level was the high-level engagement of persuading, business leaders, CEO, and influential, business personalities for them to appreciate the early childhood development sector and how they would get involved. And with this, we had one-on-one sessions with some of them. We had breakfast meetings with some of them, and we convened at that time the first ever business leaders summit on National Business Leaders Summit on ECD here in Uganda. The summit convened several stakeholders. All stakeholders in the ECD sector were part of that summit. We had a business leader from the US come down to inspire our community here on what they could do and how they could do it. We had support from Ready Nation in putting together that summit, and we had representation from the government at the highest level. We had the Minister of Finance and top government officials present at that summit. And it was at that summit that we had 50 business leaders sign up to support the early childhood development sector. And that was a key milestone that we made at that point in time. I recall we had one of the key champions was one of our top entrepreneurs and business personalities, the founder and chairman of the Simba Group of Companies, became one of the top champions. That was a leading voice, for the ECD sector in Uganda. And then we had another engagement at operational level, where we were engaging managers and operational officials at company level. Those who are in charge of running CSR budgets, those who are in charge of community projects, those who do the day-to-day operations in these businesses, in these entities. We also engage them on a one-on-one basis, and we shared with them. We prepared at that point a catalog of child-focused CSR actions that we had gathered from several studies that businesses could do, to support, the cause of children in different spheres. We also shared with them child-friendly policy actions that have happened around the world in different places that businesses could also adopt, and put in place to support the ECD sector. The issues like, flexible work hours, parenting, nutrition, fair wages, and, things of that sort. And at that point, we had one of the banks, buy into the idea and set up a breastfeeding corner for mothers. We also had another company that started parenting sessions for the employees. And it was at that point that the Aga Khan Foundation got interested and approached us to reach out to large companies, especially in the agricultural sector, those with large fields in sugarcane and tea estates that have so many employees, especially mothers who work in those employees. And the concept there was to establish baby care, centers at the workplace. Again, we articulated that to some of these enterprises, the benefits of having these facilities on site and how it would improve productivity, retention of workers, motivation, and how the business would be a success. So those were the strands of engagement that we did, but we also had another critical aspect that we focused on, and this was now on advocacy, because the advocacy space was also, something of interest to us in the program. So with advocacy, we basically focused on engaging policymakers, so that they can invest more, take more action on ECD, and ensure that ECD is at the fore of the public domain. At that point, we were invited to sit on a national committee of early childhood development in Uganda, so that our voice could be heard and we would be able to influence, policy contributions in several areas. We achieved several, policy accomplishments, just as Sarah requested to know. We made contributions, I remember at that time, to the National Integrated Early Childhood Policy to ensure that there was a clear section on the private sector role. What would the private sector do to ensure that, this policy is upheld, it's implemented, and it's achieved? We also made contributions to the early childhood care education policy for the private sector, to get involved and ensure that, the outcomes of education are better. We also, at that point, joined the parliamentary forum that had just enacted the Children's Amendment Act, and they wanted to popularize this across all sectors. The act aimed at enhancing, child protection and reduce on child exploitation. So as private sector, we participated in ensuring that we popularize that act across Uganda. We also made a case for regulating the ECD sector, the kindergartens, the nursery schools. We also started conversations on innovative financing, how the private sector resources would be leveraged, to support initiatives in ECD. And at that point, we're drawing references from what is happening, financing facilities, impact bonds, and so on, and what would happen around there. So my advice to child leaders, again, would be based on the experience that we got. One of them is that business leaders are interested, but just as mentioned by other panelists, they want, clarity, they want simple messaging, not something that is complex for them to understand. The complexities can be for the other sectors, so they want something simple. So we're always trying to break down whether the brain science behind ECD, so to a sense that they are able to understand and pick up. Of course, so that is something for child leaders to put across, that the messaging has to be clear for the leaders. The other, of course, is that business leaders want practical action. They want something for the moment, something that, they are able to do and are able to showcase, and yet ECD is a long-term engagement. So that is also something to factor in. How do we ensure that happens? The other is that, there's always behind the business leaders, they will not mention it, but one thing we found out is that there's always that thing of what is in it for me? Does this enhance my brand? Does it enhance my visibility? I mean, what is the take home? That is something at the back of their mind. So for any child leaders engaged in a program, that is something to factor in. I recall at that time, we thought that we would establish some kind of recognition so that we recognize these leaders and ensure that, their visibility is also felt. We also noticed that there's a difference. The multinationals, big corporations are more interested than the medium-sized to small businesses, probably because they are more established and see the bigger picture. So that is an area that can be looked into. One of the key areas for our success was that Private Sector Foundation is this apex body. And as an apex body, its voice could be heard. It was, strong out there. So for child leaders, it is important to engage an entity that is respected across the sphere of stakeholders. Of course, notwithstanding, we had challenges. One of the key challenges was sustainability, just as Sarah mentioned.
We need to wrap up. Can you make a final comment?
Yeah, okay. So, okay, thank you. So we had an issue of sustainability because of funding, time bound. So that's an area to look up to for any child leaders who would be interested. In a nutshell, I would want to say that the ECD space is enormous. Business leaders can play a key role in policy, in financing, in projects, and in so many areas that would impact well for society. And from my experience, the early steps program had a lot of potential to be scaled and to be replicated in other parts of the world. Yeah, thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Godwin. That's a great story. And so in a minute, we're going to open for questions to any of the panel members, from people in the room or online. I just wanted to make a couple of observations. I so much appreciate the kind words of my colleagues here, but I want to make sure about our work together, but I want to make sure that it's clear that the work is to create the type of business engagement that works for your country. It's your agenda. It is the structure that you choose. So Brazil, we went through lots of different options for their business champions, their champions for children, and it's really your choice. It's not, versions of Ready Nation or what CE International wants. And the other thing I want to mention, sometimes people will say, well, the United States is not a leader on early childhood. Absolutely true. But I think we would be worse off if we didn't have powerful business people like Jim. So some countries will say, I don't need the business people support. We have everything we need for early childhood. And I say, great, you're so fortunate. I'm so happy for you. But I think business can help support your work, whether you are building on a great foundation in your country or whether you have further to go. So with that, we're going to spend about 10 minutes or so with questions. Anybody, we'll start with in the room, and then Yvette or Ramlata will let us know if somebody online has a question. Does anybody have a question in the room? Yes, I saw you have a question.
Yeah. And I was just curious to know that when you engage with business, businesses.
Mute the microphone. Yeah. So people online.
Yeah. So I was just curious to know that when you're engaging with different businesses, that from your experience of so many colleagues on the panel, that who are the first is it the big businesses? Because I have, for example, worked with I was working in Pakistan and CSR of Mitsubishi company. They were big and they wanted a room. He started with ECE. The thing they wanted to invest in was to build a ECD room, so that they would put their plaque on it, and so it was something very concrete and tangible. So whether that is a good start, or first you need to, as Jim said, you need to convince them on the importance of ECE, ECD. So what is, in your opinion, the starting point, a better starting?
Anybody want to comment on that? What's a good starting point to build your relationship with a business leader?
I can give an example that we had in Brazil. We had a big company who decided to invest in 22 cities that they have their sites. But we are always trying to explain that not only there. In the second year, they decided to invest in another 10 cities where they have no sites, but they understood that it's important to invest in the whole country. So it's education. We need to educate them.
Carmen, did you want to say?
Yeah, I can add some of our experience. I think it works with big companies and individuals as well. We had, for example, a big company who funded the first public awareness campaign on the importance of early years. And I think it was for them that they could put their name, and it was on national television and radio channels and online also. But being part of the campaign and the discussion of the messages and what is important and what we want the audience to understand, help them understand the importance of early childhood, so they continued to support projects in the field of early childhood. while individuals not only talk to their peers, telling the story of the house, as Jim mentioned, but they were part of the advocacy work that we did, and they came with us in meetings with the government officials and with local authorities to persuade them pass different pieces of legislation to support the expansion of early childhood services, for example.
Great. Any other questions in the room? Okay, go ahead. And then we'll go to online. Do we have any online? Great, okay.
My name is Greg Whitty. I'm the CEO for Children Believe, or member of the Alliance. Our mission focus is breaking barriers to education. So my questions for Godwin, very struck by your story from Uganda, and we work in different countries across Africa and have been very focused on early childhood development. And last year at UNGA, a number of side events talked about the underinvestment in education in general in many African countries. So in the context of underinvestment, ECD tends to be one of those areas that gets funded even less. So I'm really interested to hear from Godwin whether other African nations have heard about your story and have picked up on it, and if so, which ones? Because I like to know if there's some of mine. Where were we working?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm not sure whether our story has gone out there because there were so many disruptions during COVID and so on and so forth. But I do agree with you when you mentioned that there's underinvestment in ECD, that's for sure. Uganda is one of the countries where ECD is not funded at all by the public sector. It has been left to the private sector in itself, and that is also happening in other countries. Of course, there are also initiatives in other countries, we've heard of Ghana and other places where the public sector is getting involved in supporting ECD. So the ECD sector is really ripe for the business partnerships to come in and support it to grow and get better. Of course, it would be lovely to have our story out there so that it draws inspiration and is able to galvanize support for ECD. Yeah, thank you.
There's a question from Glory Wrestler online. It says, I'm wondering whether there is a risk when engaging business that more private equity and for-profit centers and programs will move into the sector. In my country, we are trying to develop a public system.
I'm sorry, it's more private sector businesses moving into the ECD sector?
Risk of for-profit private equity businesses moving into the sector. Diane?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Right.
So this is something that we're all aware of, right? That there are a lot of private companies that are out setting up schools, involved in education, and in some places that's working really, really well. So I think what we're actually talking about here is not so much the organizations that are already involved in the education space or the childcare space. We're talking about engaging businesses that haven't previously been engaged in that space. So that's really our primary kind of target audience for what we're discussing through the Center for Business Champions. You've heard that there's a little bit of a crossover, I know, with this, and it's complex, right? Because we know that childcare, we're talking about companies who are starting childcare, right, to take care of their employees' children, which is very important. But our primary focus really here at the center is to look at those businesses, those partners who haven't previously really understood much about child development and haven't engaged in a way that can support them. So again, I know there's complexity to this, but that's sort of my response right now. I know there are many challenges. I appreciate Lori's question. I know there are many challenges around this happening around the world with a lot of private companies moving in to the education sector, but we're really talking about something a little bit different. I hope that answers the question.
Is there another question online?
Yes, one more here from Bob Height. He says, how do we justify and convince legislators to fund early childhood education as we do in our public schools?
I think this is one of the most powerful roles of the business community, and this was one of the wonderful aspects of working in Uganda and other places, is that policymakers across the world don't expect business leaders to be talking about early childhood. They expect them to be talking about infrastructure or healthcare or fiscal policy. So when you have even a small number of business leaders get in front of a policymaker and say, I do want to talk to you about infrastructure, but I see early childhood as an essential part of that infrastructure, just as important as highways, roads, bridges, etc., in making a community and a nation where my business can flourish, where families can flourish, where people want to live, and I can find people to work for my company. So that is really one of the most powerful roles they can play, even beyond what they can do as individual donors. Anybody else want to comment?
So we have Aaron and Jim.
Oh, great. I'm sorry. Jim, you want to comment on that? And then Aaron, you wanted to comment?
I would love to comment on that. It's a great issue to bring up, and I've spent my share of time advocating with lawmakers about different programs, and it is very difficult, but there is always arguments to be made about those investments actually paying back over time. And in particular, what's difficult convincing policymakers, our elected officials, is that, frankly, they're elected to short terms, 2-year terms, 4-year terms, and it's really hard to get them to understand that it's actually important and courageous to make the right decision and fund things over a longer period of time. Where maybe we're investing in 0 to 5 and we won't see some of that payback, for 10 plus years, but how important it is. And I think we're not going to convince them to make a wholesale change, but I think we can't stop trying to convince them to make incremental changes and improvements in the system, because ultimately these systems are going to work best and be sustained by public funding. And ultimately, that's where the return of the value in those investments goes to anyways. Thanks.
Aaron. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, and I think that Jim's perspective as a business owner, as someone who runs a business, is invaluable in this, because again, it does come down to those individual employers, those individual communities. Speaking sort of broadly from like the business community, which is sort of a catch-all. But I think that one of the things that sometimes prevents business leaders, business owners from engaging in the conversation is the feeling that they need to have an answer, right? Childcare is complicated. It's both in terms of policy and an impact. It's very complex. And so there are instances where it's sort of like, I don't want to say the wrong thing, or I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to say anything. And I encourage advocates to tell businesses, and I tell businesses any chance that I get, that if you're a business leader, you're a chamber, asking policymakers, what are you doing about childcare, is a powerful first step. So you don't necessarily need to have the answer, but for better or for worse, if the business community is demanding attention and action on something, more often than not, that will be one of the policymakers' top priorities. And so just saying, you know, I own a business or I'm the head of a chamber, I'm not sure exactly what to do, but I do know we need to do something because I'm hearing it from working parents, I'm hearing it from employers. And so just keeping up the drumbeat about childcare, even if you as a business leader aren't sure what the answer is, I think is still a powerful tool you have at your disposal.
Great. Well, please join me in thanking our panel for sharing their wisdom. You are welcome to stay on. We're going to transition to talking a little bit about some general advice on engaging the business community, and we'll have one more time for one more round of questions, and then Diane will wrap up. So let's transition to the next stage. I can see you a little better here, standing up. So we wanted to give you a little taste of the type of principles that we have discovered in working with business leaders for close to 20 years now, in engaging with the social sector to advance the well-being of children and youth and families. And our frame is very much developing a win-win partnership. We want to help the people in the social sector not see themselves begging for favors, asking for favors, but building a relationship with business where you are solving a mutual problem as equal partners. So we start with, what are the goals that you have in common? Often people in the social sector see business as very different, and they have very different goals, but you both have an interest in children growing up to do well, in current employees being able to focus on their jobs, as well as children contributing to the well-being of your community and your country. And we also talk about the wide variety of things that business leaders can do to advance children's agenda. Often people think of business leaders as either they donate money or they are opponents to our work. And there's a lot of ways to leverage their common ground with you and leverage all of their assets to advance the children's agenda. And you heard some examples there. So let's go on to the next slide. So one of the things that often gets in the way is that there is, in general, not always, but in general, kind of some differences between the professional culture that high-level executives grow up in and the professional culture that people in the social sector grow up in. And sometimes I have seen this happen over and over again, where two people who care deeply about the well-being of children and families have a hard time developing a relationship just because of these differences in culture. So this is one of the things that we talk about. So let's go on to the next slide. So this is a generalization, varies by country, but in general, the business community tends to want a kind of faster pace and a more goal-oriented interaction, where it might feel rude to be upfront about what you want, and they're confused because they don't know what you want. Do you want money? Do you want something else? So it is helpful to be prepared, at least in your initial conversation, to be very practical about what you want. Again, varies by country. Go on to the next. Language, we've talked about that they can use, and we'll talk a little bit more about that you can use different words to describe the same goal. And if you can be comfortable with that, then you can have a good relationship where the business leader is talking about productive employees and the people in the social sector might be talking about healthy, well-educated adults, and they're really the same thing. Go on to the next example. Metrics. Facts and evidence are important. We'll give some examples of the type of evidence and data that business leaders find compelling. But in the social sector, we're very used to kind of telling stories, which can also be important, but there are many, many compelling stories, and what is so wonderful about the children's sector is that you also have important quantitative evidence about the importance of these investments. And the last thing we'll talk about is time pressure. You heard Jim, every CEO walking in the door every morning has 10 different problems that have popped up overnight. Problem with a product, problem with a seller, problem with a buyer, problem with an employee. And so they have very, very short attention span for things that are not in their arena. And we know that children's issues are so complicated. And so if there's a great temptation to want them to understand how complicated this is, when actually they only can digest, go back. They can only digest a short piece of information and only kind of when they need it. Okay, going to the next slide. We're going to spend a little more time on this issue of same goals and different words. One of the ways that you build a win-win partnership of equals is if you can find the problems they need to solve that maybe they're describing in their words, and show how investing in early childhood can help solve those problems. They need to understand the benefits in words that are compelling to them, but also comfortable for you. This is not about making little children products in a pipeline, but it is talking about the results of your work in ways that they can see how it affects and improves their business and the community in which their business operates. And that will help you approach them as a partner solving a mutual problem, not somebody who is asking for their help to solve your problem. Let's give some just examples of different words and phrases that tend to come up in the child development frame, where we talk about children's rights, moral obligations, right thing to do, business has to pay, and use the argument of guilt. All of those are true, but they won't always get you very far with the business community. So if you can frame your goals as benefits for the current and future workforce, it's the efficient and effective thing to do with public money and private money. It helps them fulfill their duty to their stakeholders, which is not just their shareholders, but all customers and employees, and that we can pay now or pay later. It's not a question of not having any impacts if you don't invest in early childhood at the beginning. On to the next slide. So just to give a couple of examples from different places of data that speak to business, and then because people have put the impacts of early childhood into quantitative terms, it helps you make the case for their involvement. This study on the left is one that Ready Nation did when I was there, that looked at, in dollar terms, the impact of childcare problems on businesses, on parents, and on taxpayers. And this is a study that probably other countries could replicate, that looked at the percentage of people who had bad employment outcomes because of childcare problems, which is a real issue in the United States, and translated that into dollar figures. So we could say to the bank manager, you had 5 bank tellers that were not able to come to work today because of childcare issues. That has a real dollar cost on the families in the communities. The UK, the Princess of Wales Early Childhood Children's Center has created a business task force that recently released a wonderful comprehensive report on the economic costs and benefits of early childhood. Warmly recommend that you read that. We have a resource hub on our website and have a link to this really comprehensive report. And the other one is a report from UNESCO that looks at the real costs of children not getting the education they deserve. Again, this is adding some very hard evidence to what you see every day in your work about the impacts of lack of investment in early childhood. Go to the next slide. So we mentioned in our training, one of the things that go to the next slide. Yeah, one of the things that we will walk the people in our training through is prepare for a successful partnership with business. I've seen a lot of leaders in the children's sector try to reach business people or arrange a meeting, and it just doesn't go well, and then it falls apart. And so we want to prepare you to be an effective partner. So one thing is just to consider how you think about business as possible partners. A lot of organizations have very legitimate problems with business. They disagree with them on how they operate to some degree. And so there may be some businesses that aren't good partners, but you need to make sure that your language is not talking about business people generally as bad people if you want them to be your partner. This was a quote that a group in the United States asked me to find a business person to advocate for some tax policies to support children. And this was their internal messaging. And that they were also saying externally, it's really hard for a business person to be a partner with you if you're talking about them this way. Make sure your staff and board agree. Not all, a lot of children's groups have concerns about working with business. I have heard many concerns and questions, and it's important to work through those and make sure people are in agreement with building a partnership. Consider how far you can go together, which might not be as far as you want. There's a expression from a British Prime Minister in the 1800s of no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests. So you can have an overlap of interest with the business person, but maybe disagree on some things. And so it's important to figure out how far you can go together. And it's okay to disagree on some things, but where is that overlap? Offer many different opportunities. It's important to have a menu of options for the business person to get involved. So if you start with, they want to fund a child care room or center with their name on it, okay, that's where you start. But that builds the relationship so that then you can broaden the conversation that one room is not going to solve the problem for our country. So offer opportunities. Some of them are lighter touch, some of them are a little tougher on the issues that they really care about. It's really important to hone your pitch to them, to develop a very specific tight message, whether it's in writing or whether it's in that meeting, because you have a really limited time to capture your intention. And as I said before, prepare for success. I've been in meetings with business people in many different countries, and we have, maybe a half hour, which is a long time in their work. And after about 10 minutes, they will say, okay, I got it. What do you want me to do? And if I am not ready for that opening, then they will feel I have just wasted their time. Might not get there the first time. Just again, depends on the circumstance, but be ready. Okay, let's go to the last slide, or next to the last slide. So we wanted to end this, and then we'll entertain some questions, and Diane will close for us on how we hope we have gotten you excited, that word again, about working with the business community, and that you would like to learn more and partner with us. So we have a website that has resources and examples. You can join our mailing list. We don't send out messages very often because we know everybody is very busy, but we want you to know about new opportunities. So we will be offering the Training Institute, which will be online, a multi-session, probably 5 different sessions online, to take you through a process of becoming ready to engage with business sometime in early 2025. If you are really interested in developing a network of business champions in your country, and you have a group of people who are really ready to go, we could work with you to do training specifically for your country or city on what it would look like, what is your agenda, what do you need to do to prepare, just as we did with Brazil. So we'd love to talk to you about that. We will be developing a peer network as people go through the training. Then we want people to be able to share with each other on how they are progressing in engaging with business. We would love to, if you know of a company that has a corporate social responsibility or an ESG portfolio, and you think, well, it's got some good issues on there, the environment, etc., but it really needs to talk about children, because obviously well-trained workforce and a well-productive productive citizenry is important for any issue. We would love to do that. We also would love to have examples of your work with business. We have a resource hub where we posted some examples of where we have seen good collaborations or good reports that speak to business. If you have examples, we would love to shine a spotlight on your work. Many people are doing this around the world. So we would love to be kind of a central repository of great examples so we can highlight and applaud your work. And we're happy to come and talk about this work in other forums. We will be at the ESA conference, the International Step-by-Step Conference in October. We'll be at the Break Start conference online in November. And we'd love to talk about this. And as I tell Diane, there is nothing, can you guess? There is nothing I love more than talking about this. So Diane kind of sometimes have to say, okay, that's enough. So we would love to help you in any way that we can. So any other questions before Diane takes over? Anything online, everyone?
This is kind of echoing, so I know this is something that you're
Oh, thank you.
I'm putting a bunch of questions together. There seems to be a lot of people asking to learn more about what are the opportunities for business to support early childhood.
Right. I will also invite Carmen and Victor to comment on that, but they are great communicators. They often have platforms about that they can use to get out the message of early childhood. In the US, a gasoline station company that has hundreds of outlets has these little video screens above the pumps when you pump your gas, and they put in messages about the importance of early childhood, so everybody standing there pumping their gas for 2 minutes gets a dose of why children are important. So putting them in front of the media, putting them in front of other important decision makers is a great use of their reach. So Carmen or Victor, or great, Godwin and Jim are still there. Anything else you want to say about all the different things that business leaders could do, Carmen, please?
I can add one other type of actions that we had in Romania with the biggest milk company. We used their milk boxes to post messages, short messages about the importance of early years and also parenting advice for children of different ages. So people buying milk had this opportunity to learn about the importance of early years and also to increase their parenting skills and knowledge.
Do you want to talk about what you were saying before we started about companies needing to build in childcare?
Yes, one other thing that we did was that in most of the big cities in Romania, they were facing a lack of services, early childhood development services. And one of the challenges for the local authorities were that investors won't come to their cities. So during the conversations that we had with the local authorities and business people, we came to the understanding that the investors in real estate were invited to the table, and they were persuaded to, when they do their investments, to make a space available for early childhood services. And this is how young families moved in their residential apartments, buildings, and investors were persuaded to come and invest in those particular cities at the invitation of the local authorities, because workforce was available there to be trained and start working in this new investment, like factories or institutes, different types of investments.
Great. Anybody else want to comment?
Yes, I think it's important, as you said, to talk to them in a way that they're going to understand. And in the end, when we work for NGOs, we talk about the cause, children. We need to know what we want in the end of the meeting. So it needs to be clear. And about opportunities, depending on the place. In our country, sometimes it's daycare centers, sometimes to improve literacy, sometimes it's other parts. So we need to know when you talk to explain a little bit about the sector, but you need to explain what do you want at the end of the meeting.
What do you want? Godwin or Jim want to add anything? Okay. Any other questions?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay. Great, yes. The microphones. We'll have maybe one more question after this, and then we'll wrap it up.
I'm Phoebe Clark-Hain. I've worked with Childhood Education International in the past on other aspects of education. But I wanted to make a comment that is followed with a question. The first being that having watched kind of these conversations over a long period of time about education and business, I do see that sweet spot happening where business and education are not necessarily competing about who does what, but working together on policy and advocacy for a common goal of provision of more education, not necessarily one influencing the other in how they do things. Because I think that's where it gets really contentious. Business is trying to influence curriculum or vice versa, right? And so with that being said, when we're talking, my question now is where we're talking about policy, one kind of elephant in the room is the question of gender, considering the overrepresentation of women in the early childhood care, childhood sphere, but not necessarily in the leadership or in the higher paying aspects. They're often the lowest paid, and then in the opposite direction, in the business, the underrepresentation of women in the business sector. Generally speaking, it's getting better in some places for sure, but if we're looking at things globally, maybe not so much. And so how, in that policy and advocacy overlap, how do we have examples of how this is coming out and how it's working out, or goals or something like that?
I know many of the countries that I've talked to have a real concern about women in the workplace, and it's still true that women bear most of the responsibility for childcare. And so the only way to boost mothers' participation in the workplace is through supporting them to get childcare. So that's a great example of where the interests overlap. Diane, do you want to say anything?
I think that, I think one of the most important things is that we have an opportunity, right? When we're coming together with a common goal of supporting children, there's the opportunity to have other conversations as well. We need to enter those conversations sensitively and with care, but there is an opportunity to educate. So I think that's something that we can all think about as we move forward and begin these conversations with business. We've had, so I hope that this somewhat answers your question. There was another question that had come online about the children's rights as well. And in a way, it's a sort of similar answer. This is why I'm bringing it up now. Is somebody on one of our virtual attendees was asking about children's rights and the opportunity to sort of speak about child rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I think it's a similar sort of answer I would pose. You know, it's really important, right, that we all understand that we understand business better, and they can certainly help to educate us, but that we also have an opportunity to educate around some of these other issues of equity, rights, etc. And again, we want to make sure that we're entering these conversations carefully, that we understand the national or regional or community context in which we're having these conversations, but it does open the door for us to come together, to join together, and to have these important sort of dialogues. So thank you.
Great, I think with that, Diane, let me turn it over to you to make our closing remarks. And we will, we can hang around if people have questions, and you can follow up on email, and we would love to talk to you.
All right. So as you know, I started out the day feeling very excited. And now I'm just inspired beyond measure. Yes, this is a critical conversation we were having today. And you should see my messy notes. I am so inspired that I have all kinds of comments, but I will not keep you long. I promise that there are a few things that I just want to emphasize or re-emphasize as we close the session today. First, thank you. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. It's been an amazing opportunity to be able to begin what's going to be a very important journey for our Center for Business Champions. And you can see now why we have the friends and colleagues that we do with the expertise and knowledge that they have, working not only with the early childhood development sector, but understanding the business sector and working in the business sector as well. And of course, why we have Dr. Sarah Watson with us. She is a wonderful expert in all of this. You've heard people refer to Ready Nation many times, which is an organization that she formerly founded and was working Ready Nation International as well. You should read her full bio. I did not state it this morning, but she is wonderful. We're proud to be working with her. So we've heard some amazing stories today, practical ideas. I love getting to the practical ideas about how we can do this. You know, business coalitions we can form, business leaders summits for ECD, including government in these conversations. Looking at how businesses can adopt family-friendly practices and how businesses can help to change policies that support children and families. The advocacy work of businesses can be critical. When you take a business leader with you or a group of business leaders in to have a policy discussion with government leaders, can be a really what they call a game-changing moment, a moment for real change to happen. There are large companies, certainly, that are very interested in this. A lot of the multinational companies are interested and already investing in some cases. But let's not leave out the middle kind of size companies and small companies who really know their nations and communities so well. We want to be able to reach out to them also and to speak to them about their community's needs. As you can see, some of this work has been going on through Sarah since the 1990s. And there's so many things that business can do and we can do together to support the future workforce. And that is critical. The skills that our children are engaging in today, that we're teaching today through our schools, through informal or formal education settings, are so critical. But we also need to make sure that business leaders understand child development and just value the developing children, right? Because children are us, essentially. They are the adults of the future, and we really need to invest in them and support their well-being, their happiness, their protection, while we're thinking about how do we develop the skills in children that they're going to need to have successful futures. We've heard about private sector foundations, chambers of commerce, economic development and business groups that we can engage with, groups that are already receptive to hearing this message. So let's try to reach out to them as well and make sure that we're getting their voices and their perspectives on these issues. Let's plan together for long-term impact. And I know it's so easy to say, right? And so hard to do. But I think if we create enough momentum and galvanize that momentum, which is what we're trying to do through the work of the center, I think we can really look at how does this take us on a true trajectory of change. So important for us to think about. We want those short-term wins, obviously, in bringing early childhood leaders and business leaders together, but we need to have long-term impact. The Summit for the Future. Again, I mentioned at the beginning of this session how New York is about to be overwhelmed with business leaders from around the world who will be attending the United Nations General Assembly, which is also going to incorporate the Summit of the Future. And I do encourage you all, those of you who are in our audience listening online, to go to the Summit of the Future website that the United Nations has put up and take a look at the Pact for the Future. You'll see a lot of places where there are intersections between what we're talking about today and what we can all engage with to make a better future for everyone. I also just want to thank the staff with us from CE International. We have Dr. Amlata Prasad with us this morning, Yvette Murphy. They are key staff members of ours who are engaging with Sarah and the Center for Business Champions to create this dynamic dialogue that we're going to have continuing. And as you can hear, we offer trainings. We can also consult with NGOs, with governments, with businesses to help all of us to understand how to do this work effectively and sensitively as well. You've heard me mention sensitivity several times. That's something that we at CE International really pride ourselves on, is really looking at context and being sensitive to others and really listening to other voices as well. We will be distributing this recording, so if you want to watch it again, if you're already here, you're welcome to do so. And we'll also be distributing it worldwide and hope that it gets a lot of play out there. And I'll just end with kind of reiterating Jim Sperlino's message of this is the foundation we are creating, not only the foundation for child development, but the foundation for our people and planet moving forward. This is a critically important moment in time, and we're so proud to be contributing to that at CE International and with the Center for Business Champions and with all of you together. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. That's a long way. I hope you will have some time to enjoy yourself.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. Great to see you. Good to see you. I will see you in.
Yeah, I saw that. Thank you.
Tokyo.